Happy Pride Month! Let's talk about a horror film that isn't necessarily a gay film per se, but we queers know some coding when we see it. Gothic horror in particular is about reanimating or not being able to suppress the parts of us that are hidden or dead, and the queer subtext is so strong in this film that it's worth digging into. So let's take a look at the 1935 film The Bride of Frankenstein. Even though Mary Shelley didn't write Bride of Frankenstein, this odd sequel was inspired by her, a bisexual woman, and the legacy continued. The film was written by William Hurlbut, who wrote Sin of Sins in 1926, the first play about lesbians ever written by an American. The director was James Whale, a notoriously out director in Hollywood. And the film also starred several queer actors, including those who played Dr. Frankenstein and Dr. Pretorius. Frankenstein movies, unlike the book, call the monster Frankenstein. Also in The Bride of Frankenstein, Victor Frankenstein is called Henry for no apparent reason. The story begins with Frankenstein escaping death by the townspeople and Henry Frankenstein, his creator, being himself brought back to life when he returns to his castle and reunites with his fiancée Elizabeth. After Henry wakes up, Elizabeth begins having visions that a shady figure is going to steal her man away from her. Right on cue, Dr. Pretorius shows up. Pretorius is a scientist and a total queen who comes banging on the castle door with his wild wavy hair and drawn-on eyebrows, demanding to see Henry alone. He literally kicks Elizabeth out of their bedroom and proceeds to convince Henry to make an unnatural baby with him, aka a bride for Frankenstein. Meanwhile, Boris Karloff as Frankenstein is wandering around the woods trying unsuccessfully to make friends. As soon as a villager catches a glimpse of him, regardless of what he's doing, they shoot at him and poke him with fire. Now, Frankenstein isn't necessarily gay, but he's the outsider. He was simply created that way and will always be punished for it. This is arguably why queers can relate more easily to the monsters in horror. We've all been on the receiving end of those torches. Henry, Pretorius, and Frankenstein return to the lab and bring the dead woman back to life in a rather fantastic scene. She's gorgeous, if not cranky, as she realizes she's been created for the sole purpose of being a wife. As soon as she can focus, she's basically like, no means no, and she literally hisses. At this point, Frankenstein has simply endured too much rejection. He finds a convenient self-destruct lever in the lab right when Elizabeth shows up to take Henry away. Generously, Frankenstein growls, "Yes, you live, go," to Henry and Elizabeth. And then he looks at the bride and Dr. Pretorius and says, "You stay, we belong dead." This really hits hard. The straight-presenting newlyweds deserve to live, and the unnatural beings and their supporter/P-flag father figure are all better dead. The brilliance of and real message of the film is that the audience itself is the monster. They're the same as the villagers who showed an innocent being nothing but contempt and abuse, removing any opportunities for community and support and love. The bride, who is only in the film for a few moments, is then also destroyed by Frankenstein's self-loathing and contempt for his difference, and we all know that story. Sadly, the director James Whale himself also committed suicide years later, but not before creating worlds where he could tell relatable stories under the radar, and not before hiring a bunch of his queer friends to write and act in these stories. I give The Bride of Frankenstein a 4 out of 5 rating. It gets a little muddy toward the end, but it worked around the Hays Code brilliantly. So cheers to the monsters and to being in loving community with other monsters. Happy Pride.